Hey everyone, welcome to Perpetuality. Today we have the Mido Rainbow Diver or the Decompression Timer 1961 for review. But before we get into that, I did cover the Ocean Star Tribute Blue, which is another variant of this watch, the non-limited edition. I'll leave a link here in the video for you guys to check it out. Without further ado, let's get into the full video. The Mido Decompression Timer has the same case, or shares the same case with the Mido Ocean Star Tribute series. Now that means that this watch gets 40.5mm in diameter case size, 46.5mm lug-to-lug length, and depth of roughly 13.5mm in the mid case, making this a fairly wearable watch for majority of wrist size. There's an excellent article on monochrome watches that covers the differences of the new and old decompression timer. I'll leave a link in the description below for you guys to check it out. Now, these photos are courtesy of monochrome watches, but getting into the differences here, you will start to see that there is a white dial and a black dial. The PowerWind 1000, as seen on the left here, has the same decompression scale, but does have a white overlay. The case design is a little bit different and the dimensions are actually smaller than the modern 40mm decompression timer with the black dial. Now keep in mind, the original PowerWind 1000 is a watch that's going for tens of thousands of dollars right now, above 10 grand actually. Thinking of the history rather, of the Mido PowerWind, it actually comes in line with a lot of achievements that Mido has been well known for. One of which is that they were one of the first to implement a cork gasket inside of the actual crown tube that would expand, and it would actually create a watertight seal to allow for the watch to be water resistant. They're also the creators of the original unbreakable watch band way back in the early 30s. So there's a long list of achievements that many seem to have forgotten or Mido doesn't really talk about. So how on earth do you read this watch, and what is a decompression scale? Well, the decompression scale is actually what divers would use when they're descending in depths, and upon resurfacing, they would need to determine how much time they would have to spend in decompression at 3 meters in order to avoid decompression sickness, or otherwise known as the bends, a condition that involves nitrogen in the bloodstream, which can be very painful. So the way that you would use this is if you take a look at the 12 o'clock, numbers in black and white actually indicate the depth. So if you, let's say for example, were to dive at a depth of 30 meters and you spent 45 minutes underwater, you'd follow the dial all around to 45 minutes, and the black and white number that's indicated in that green scale that's aligned to the 30 meters track would tell you that you'd have to spend 30 minutes at 3 meters in decompression in order to avoid decompression sickness. It's a pretty cool feature. I'm not sure the real-world applications of it, but seeing it here is actually quite remarkable because nowadays we have dive computers that can do all the calculations for us. But it is kind of a charming 1960s vibe to it, and the printing is extremely sharp. All things considered, the dial's surprisingly legible for how busy it looks. And the reason being is that they've extended that minute hands all the way towards the outer extremities of the dial. The heart of this beast is actually the Powermatic 80 from the Swatch group, and it does have a power reserve of 80 hours. It is actually widely known to be used under Tissot and Mido as well. And this movement is actually a slower beating movement at 21,600 vibrations per hour. That would explain why it has such a lengthy power reserve. It's a pretty good movement to be featured in this watch. The bezel is actually a 60-click bezel with an aluminum insert, and it is loomed with a 12 o'clock pip there. The overall bezel is okay, more on that later. But let's get into the actual case, and as you can see, it is 13.4mm in depth as mentioned previously, but it's mostly in high polished finishing. And you can see that it is a bit of a fingerprint magnet. The sapphire crystal that's featured on this watch does sit proudly upon the bezel of the watch, which kind of aids within keeping that bezel unmarked for the most part. Finishing is superb. The way that they've done this high polished finishing, even though I'm not a fan of it personally, I do think that they've executed it very cleanly, and there are nice lines to split the mid case to the lugs to the actual crown guards too. Altogether, it's quite a stunning watch to behold in the metal. It is interesting to note that the screw down crown that's featured in this watch is good for only 200-meter water resistance. Now keep in mind that's because this watch does sit below Mido's other dive watches. It's more of an entry level piece to the titanium Ocean Star series rather of watches that they provide that has 600 meters water resistance. Now of course the case back is quite interesting because it does feature the Mido starfish there in high polished, and then in deep relief is a bead blasted finishing for the actual case back itself. And as you can see, the etching, the marks that are used on the actual case back are sharp, and they're done really well. I do have to comment that this is an area that I was very surprised to find out about the Mido. There we go, it is limited edition, let's not forget that. The party piece that I actually figured out for myself when I took apart the strap was that this watch has two spring bar mounting points, and that's because the bracelet that Mido provides you sits closer to the case compared to straps. There wouldn't be any space for straps to move around if you mounted it inner towards the case. So Mido supplied you with two different mounting points. The actual bracelet is interesting. The clasp itself is also signed with the Mido logo in deep relief as well and brushed all across. It actually is a very high quality piece. Now the star of the Mido decompression timer is not just the dial, it's actually the bracelet. It does come with this 21mm Milanese bracelet that's signed at the buckle here, or the clasp, and on the other side there's a locking clasp to go along with it too. So this bracelet will actually fit in, rather the other side of the clasp will fit into this little bar right here, and you lock it in place with this clasp over top. Pretty handsome, and I have to say that this is one of the more thicker, more robust looking Milanese bracelets I've seen provided on a watch in recent memory. I like the idea that the Milanese bracelet's meant to be adjustable to get the custom fit that you want on your wrist. And also, it does make sense for it to be on the dive watch too, especially given the fact that this now has a safety clasp at the top right there. Now with that being said, the Mido does have a party piece. It does also come with two other straps. The first of which being this kind of rubberized, more canvas material. It's kind of an interesting material altogether. Feels like it's soft suede on the backside. It is quick release pins as well, and it is 21mm. And there is a bit of a contrast yellow stitching on the outer edges. I'd like to say this is actually treated canvas. I could be wrong, but if I am, I'll correct myself here. The buckle also is signed with the Mido logo. Altogether, it's nice to have this, but you do get a secondary strap, and this is kind of cool. This is a leather strap. My camera can just focus in here, perfect. That actually has contrast stitching in a vintage aesthetic on each side. Also featuring the quick release pins on the back and suede lining. I think this would go very handsomely with the watch, given that the colors here are actually the same colors that are on the dial itself. So I'm just impressed that Mido was able to provide so much with little money on the bracelet and strap side of things. I have a 6 1/4 inch wrist, and this watch wears perfectly on my wrist. The lugs curve down just enough and it tapers inwards to the wrist, so it lays nice and flat, centered on my wrist. And the overall lug to lug dimensions of, I think it's 47.4 to 48mm, does not breach the extremities of my wrist, which makes this watch just a very comfortable wearer. But let's talk about the elephant in the room. Now, the first thing is that this is a limited edition watch, and it was originally sold on Hodinkee and Noman Watches' other online retailers. You can't get them anymore. They've been long sold out, and now they sell for $2,000 and above in the secondary market. It isn't worth that price point, or worth that particular price that you would pay to get it, because honestly speaking, they've not done a whole lot here other than giving this a very special dial. It still shares the same case design as the Ocean Star Tribute Blue, which the Powerwind 1000, the original, the OG of this watch, had a much more unique looking case, a much more special looking case, if you will. I wish Mido did more in that regard to justify the fact that this is a limited edition, other than giving it a nice dial. The other things that hold it back is the overall high polish finishing. It leads for a fingerprint magnet. The whole case is high polished, and I'm not a fan of that in particular. I would have liked to see some brush finishing to break up the high polish and give it some nice depth and different, something more interesting to look at in terms of the case design. The other things are the 21mm lug width, which I just don't get why Mido would do that. But guys, this is overall an excellent watch. And if you liked the video today, please like the video as it definitely helps me out. Consider subscribing if you want to follow along for more watch content from me, and I will definitely catch you in the next one.